Hello and welcome to a short video showing how to use a graphing calculator to find the x-intercept of a function. In particular, in this video, we'll be entering a function to be graphed. We'll be using the table to decide on a good viewing window to graph our function. We'll set the viewing window. We'll graph the function in the viewing window, and then we'll use the second calc menu to find the x-intercept of the function that we graph. So that's what we'll be doing throughout this video. So I've brought up the graphing calculator, and the first thing to do is to enter the function to be graphed. So for that, we're going to go up here to the upper left to the y equals button and bring up our function editor and then enter the function in the example that we're doing. And so our function is 2.5x. This is our profit function in the example. Minus 300. And you can do this for any function, but this is for the example that we're doing in this video in the notes. Okay, so I've entered my function. Now I want to find where this is our profit function, so we had break even, the profit is equal to 0. So what I need to do is find out where this function has a profit value of 0, and that's equivalent to finding where the graph crosses the x-axis, the p being the y-axis or the vertical axis being profit. So when p is equal to 0, our function's on the x-axis. So I need to decide on a window for that. So that'll be the next thing we'll do in this video. So we've entered the function to be graphed. So the next thing to do is to bring up the table feature and put values in our table to decide on what a good window is to graph our function. So that's what we'll bring up next. So now to get into the table editor, you're going to hit the second function here in blue on the upper left, and then above the graph key it says table. But before I do that, I want to go into table setup and make sure my table is set up properly for doing this. So hit the second button, and then I'm going to enter into table setup. And what I want to check here is that where it says independent variable, your calculator may say auto. If it doesn't, you want to use the arrow key. So I'm going to navigate down and then over, highlight where it says independent ask, and then press enter to make sure that that's highlighted. And I also want the dependent variable, that's my y value on the calculator, to say auto. We're always going to leave that as auto, but by setting the independent variable to ask, that will allow me to enter values into the table as opposed to the calculator generating the table for me. Okay, so now I'm going to go to second and then table. And if you see any values in your table, just hit the delete button here next to the second function. You just clear out what's in the table. And so starting from scratch, since x is the number of items I'm going to sell, x has got to be greater than or equal to 0. So the first value I'll put in is 0 for x. And I can see that when x is 0, the profit is minus 300, just meaning that I'm losing money here if I sell nothing. So that's what we would expect. And this is also the y-intercept of our function. So let me try putting 10 in. And I'm losing a little bit less, but I think I'll jump up to 50 now. And I'm sort of choosing these values at random, and I can see I'm still losing money. I want to get to 0 profit. Getting closer, maybe let's go to 150 in that. Okay, so at 150 I have a profit of $75. So somewhere between 100 and 150 I have my break-even point. My profit is going to be 0. So based on the table, I'm going to set my window to go from 0 to 150 on the x-axis, and then my y values are going to go from minus 300, and I'll just make the maximum y value 100. So by using the table, I can decide on what a good viewing window should be when I graph my function. And that's the next part of the video. Okay, so now that we've defined our viewing window, we're ready to set the viewing window. And so I'm going to enter the values from the previous step into the graphing calculator. And I'll be setting the viewing window, and then I'll graph the function, and I'll do both of those steps together next. Okay, so now I'm going to press the window button here. And I'm going to go from 0 to 150. For an increment, I think I'll just use 25. And then my minimum y value, negative 300. Make sure to use the minus key on the bottom of the calculator here below the enter button, not the subtraction, which is for subtracting two values. So negative numbers are entered differently from subtracting two values. And we're going to go to 100. And I think 25 is probably a good increment there. You don't want your increment too small relative to your minimum and maximum value. That will cause too many tick marks to graph, and then you get a window that doesn't have any tick marks at all because they're all jammed up next to each other. It just looks like another y-axis. So you want I usually make the scale to be about 1/10 the range of the values. So in that neighborhood. Okay, so I've set my viewing window, and now I'm ready to graph my profit function. So let's go ahead and hit our graph button. And so now I can see my profit function, and I can see an x-intercept there, and we'll find that x-intercept, that's our break-even point, in the next step of the video. Okay, so we've set the viewing window, we've got the graph of our function now, and so the next thing we want to do is to actually find the x-intercept of that function using the second calc 0, and that's what we'll do next. Okay, so now I want to enter into the calculate menu that's above the trace button here. It says calc, and so I'm going to hit second, and then the calc button, and then I'm going to choose item 2, 0. A zero of a function is an x-intercept. It's where the graph crosses the x-axis. That's called a zero of the function. So press item 2, 0, or highlight it and press enter. And then it's going to ask me for what it says. It's asking for a left bound question mark. So what you want to make sure is your cursor here. You can see the cursor here is positioned to the left of where the graph crosses the x-axis. So anywhere to the left is fine. I can maybe move a little closer to where it crosses using the trace key. So I'm just tracing along the curve. And anywhere to the left is fine. That's going to be good. And I'm going to set the left bound by pressing enter once. So press enter. And then it's going to ask me for a right bound. So now I need to use the cursor, the trace feature on the cursor, to trace to the right of where the graph crosses the x-axis. And anywhere to the right is fine. I just want to show you that I'm definitely to the right. That's a good point right there. So press enter. And it really doesn't matter where you do as long as you're to the right. So now what these markers are showing me above the curve is the markers are defining an interval where the graph crosses the x-axis and contains my x-intercept. So I'm just telling the calculator where to look for the x-intercept. So the last step, it says guess. You can just press enter. You don't need to put the value anywhere specific. Just press enter a third time and it will compute that x-intercept for you. And so you can see the calculator has found the x-intercept when x is 120, the y value, which is our profit, is 0. So in this case, we need 120 items for a profit to be 0 and to break even. And so that's our break even point. 120 items will produce 0 profit, and thus we'll break even. And that ends our video.